film and some of the topics that were presented. My name is Jarrett Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of the Labor for Black Lives Coalition. Thank you. Wendell really laid it out, but we got started out of the uprisings of 2020. We knew what was happening in the streets. We were in the streets, so really wanted to think about how labor showed up in the movement for Black lives, in the movement for racial justice, and in police reform. And you know, it is a beautiful thing that several years later that we are joined by so many of the folks that we do this work with day after day in the streets. So without further ado, I'm gonna just introduce our panelists quickly and have them give a little short bio of themselves. But we of course have our wonderful moderator, Seth Anderson Oberman. We are also joined by Tanya T-Ba, as we know her, from Free the Ballot. We also have two wonderful academics with us. We have Celeste Winston, who's a Temple professor. Is she here? Nope, she's not here, okay. And also joined by Dr. Monika Dirksen, assistant professor at Morgan State University. We have Salim Holbrook from the Abolition Law Center. We have Lee Owens, currently at the Prison Society, but an incredible activist throughout Philadelphia. And our wonderful filmmaker who we saw today, Matthew Solomon. So without further ado, I'm gonna kick it off for our panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Jarrett. So what we want to do is, because we want to make sure that there's time for the audience for you guys to ask questions and engage as well. So we're going to take a couple questions up here to get us going, and then we'll open it up and have folks be able to, you know, jump in and ask a question or make a comment that you'd like people to respond to. And the way we're going to do it here, because there's lots of questions and we might not get through them all, is not everybody has to respond to every question, but when I ask the question, if you feel moved to respond to it, you know, please raise your hand. And if nobody raises their hands, then I'll just choose somebody. But and then you know, once it seems like if there's nothing to add, then we'll move on. Okay. So I guess you know, I'd like to start us off with the filmmaker Matthew Solomon. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And I want to thank everybody who made a contribution to help Matthew get back to California. We covered his airplane costs. Matthew, I'm wondering if you could just start us off talking a little bit about how you've been using the film, right? Because I know you've been taking the film around the country. And, you know, what was your idea with that, and what kind of conversations have been coming out of the showings, and what do you see coming out of that?
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to say thank you to all of you for being here and for being interested in this conversation, and all the panelists for your time, and Ashana and the Falzer Club, and Seth, thank you for inviting me to do this. You know, so this started out as a school project. I was in a master's in public administration program. My idea was to do some community screenings to help open up the conversation around abolition and alternatives to policing. At the beginning, which was about a year ago, our first official screening was February 3rd of last year. And tonight is our 38th screening. Second time in Philly. Over 60 organizations have hosted or partnered or supported screenings nationwide. Over 2,000, I think close to 3,000 people have seen the film by now. And so as things started to pick up, when we screened in Atlanta, I think it was in September, October last year, what hit me was I'm meeting all of these amazing activists who are doing great work in their cities. For the most part, everybody's kind of siloed off from everybody else. And so I was like, how do we bring everybody together, at least make people in Sacramento aware of people in Philly and who's doing what in Memphis and Kansas City and, you know, all of that. And so one of the things we've been doing is I've been working with Here for the Kids and Momentum Strategies in Memphis to help bring all the partners together to build coalition power. And at the very least, to make everybody aware who's doing what and where so we have more collective power. At the very most, to be able to leverage that into political influence, changing policy and things like that. And so the last thing I'll say is after 2020 with COVID and how people responded negatively to that and how people responded negatively to the Black Lives Matter protests following George Floyd, I lost a lot of faith in humanity. And literally, I was losing long-term friends like every week, 2020, 2021, who are just, and so doing this has also helped to restore my faith and meeting amazing people who actually care about people. Like, that's the thing for me. If we really cared about one another, we would do things differently. And here we are in a room full of people, on a stage full of people who really care about people, who are doing things differently. And so that's my goal.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us this, what I think is a gift to the movement. And a real tool for us to be able to use to organize conversations in places like this, in living rooms, and churches and mosques, and across our communities. It's a very powerful film. There's a lot to talk about, and I wanted to just start kind of with reactions from the panelists about what we just watched and why this is such an important conversation that we're having. So reactions to the film, and then why is it so important that we're having this conversation right now? Anybody like to start?
I wanted to start because I wanted to really be able to say publicly that I think this is one of the most important films for our movement that I have personally seen thus far, all the years that I've been activizing throughout Pennsylvania. So I want to say mega kudos to this man for this film, because it's really important. Every movement has its theme song, right? Or it has its thing, right? And I think this is one of the things that we got to add to the movement to get the conversation started, but to really begin to shift the narrative. When we saw defund back in 2019, 2020, I think it was very flawed, right? We had a lot of issues with the narrative and getting the message across in a way that felt like it was going to translate beyond just the people in this room that already know. We're preaching to the choir right now, but our job, and your job, is to take these messages and take them into the community so that we can begin to change hearts and minds in a collective way. So I think this film does that. It really gives us the foundation to be able to shift the narrative in a way that, may not happen tomorrow, but we'll continue to chip away at it and get to where we need to be. And if you look at some of the so-called progressive issues that are at the forefront right now, 10, 15 years ago, they weren't there, right? So it shows that it takes a little bit of time, but you got to keep chipping away at it. And when you have films like this, this is I think the start of it, because art imitates life, right? You can't just have the movement, can't just have people talking all the time, you can't just have protests. You got to have all of the components, right? And so we have art, we have all that. We got people in the movement that paint, that do events that's, tied up in just that, right? And so it's about getting the message across on all channels and making sure that, we use it to change hearts and minds to the people that are, not just decision makers, but to the community of people that vote.
Thank you, Lee. Tiba?
I guess I want to say, because our government, they're masters at narrative, this film is really important because it helps to break that narrative. In absence of a film like this, people believe the worst that they hear about somebody, and once they're taken out of our community and they're incarcerated, there's all of this that believes that this person must have done something wrong. This film was powerful because I still can't watch Sandra Bland. I still can't watch George Floyd. And there are going to be some people that have no idea what has happened until they see it. So we're fighting masters of narrative with our own government that has decided that they're more important and that the few control the many. And that's the opposite of democracy, which is a word that the average fifth grader may not even know what it means. So this film helps us because it does help change the narrative that the government that we currently live under, that we pay taxes to, has already misled us with.
Thank you, Tupac. Does anybody else have anything you want to add? Or should we move to the next question? Move to the next question? Okay. All right, next question. So how did we get here? And why, despite so much evidence to the contrary, do we continue to invest massive amounts, billions and billions and billions of dollars, into a system of policing that has not shown an ability to dramatically reduce crime or make us safer? So the question is, who is benefiting from the system as it's currently constructed?
So the reason we keep doing that is because, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right, solid. My name is Salim Holbrook. I'm the executive director of the Abolitionist Law Center. So that question is really a simple question on one hand. The reason why we do it is because police exist, right, to not make our communities safer, to not solve crime. Police are agents of social control and social containment. That's it. They essentially are the arm of the government. They are the arm of the law. And their role is to impose law and order. And I think that the film did a very good job in its narration to monopolize and inflict violence. That is their job, pure and simple. I feel like we always got to do this, but we can't avoid not doing it. If you go back to the history of policing, you'll see that it emerged out of the slave patrols, right? But policing black and brown bodies in the United States, particularly black males, has always been about violence. Even before police, it has always been about inflicting violence on the body to keep them in line. There was a persistent fear. When you take people's freedom, when you treat them as property, when you could take someone's wife, when you could take someone's daughter, when you could take someone's husband and ship them to a plantation 200 miles away and they have no say in that, you can't go to sleep at night comfortable, right? You go to sleep at night in fear, and the only way that you can kind of balance it is by imposing a state of fear on that population that you're oppressing. That's why I really love one of the things Amos Wilson said, that when you look at this country, when you look at how much harm this country has caused black people, brown people, people around the world, how the hell can people in this country feel they have the right to go to sleep at night feeling like they in peace, right, or safe? And I think that's a true statement. So it all goes back to policing as violence, policing as social control. Anytime there were movements to change the status quo in the country, whether it was for social rights, civil rights, economic rights, who were called in to deal with it? How did they deal with it? They repressed, they smashed, they broke heads, they broke necks. In some cases, they killed, they terrorized, they disappeared, right? Who did it? The police. When you start realizing that the role of police is for the state to inflict violence and keep the so-called rabble in line, to keep black and brown communities in line, then you will understand why we keep investing in it, because the people who have power in this country, they have a vested interest in maintaining this social order. Because Eldridge Cleaver said it, and for all his faults, I would encourage people to read the chapter on Soul on Ice where he breaks down police, National Guard, and the military, whereas he said the military are police on the global level, and the police in our communities are the military on a domestic level. And they all exist to serve and maintain this social structure that is based on exploitation, discrimination, disenfranchisement, and keeping a significant amount of the population in poverty and repression. So that's why this country keeps investing in it, because it's the people who benefit from our oppression, who benefit from this unjust social order, benefit from this type of policing that we see. Our communities certainly don't benefit from it.
Thank you.
So I would like to add on to that. So I completely agree. And as a historian of race and policing in Philadelphia, I see it just as you see it. We live in an American society that's a racial hierarchy, but also a capitalistic society where people at the top benefit by profiting economically off of the masses. So if we're looking at the 20th century, we're talking about, let's say, the post-war period, World War II ends. Of course, there's migration from the South with African Americans, millions of people coming up north. You also have desegregation happening, so more housing, more integrated neighborhoods, but you also have more factory jobs, more competition for resources. And as a result, you have government societies that have experiences or having installed policies of segregation or de facto segregation or segregation by tradition in the North versus Jim Crow in the South, where people are here to ban all access to everything that you're supposed to have: housing, good schools, good food, quality of all resources, stuff that is social welfare that the government largely, as T-Boss said, should be paying for. We're paying for it through taxes. The government gives it back to us in services and social welfare. So after the post-war period, you see there's white flight, there's job flight, there's defunding of housing, of schools, of other public recreational facilities, and as a result, you have not only majority people of color that are remaining in these cities like Philadelphia in the 60s and into the 70s and onward, but they're also getting a lack of quality materials or resources from the government or even other adjacent services. And as a result, you also have a city, and not just Philadelphia, but other major cities in the country that are so concerned about maintaining a fruitful tax base. So the stuff that pays for all the education, the housing, the street cleaning, snow removal, and so on, they're so invested in maintaining a middle class, an upper class, a white society that will pay for the put taxes into the city to pay for stuff. They're willing to defund it and revert that money to the police department, to the point where the police are being used to maintain everything, to try to restore social order. They're also trying to prevent protests that advocate for equal rights, and this is during the civil rights movement and onward. You have police trying to convince, and I'm being blunt, but I'm honestly being true, convince white middle class and upper class people that it's okay to live in inner city Philadelphia or in North Philly or in South Philly or in West Philly, even if there's people from other backgrounds moving into the city in the 60s and the 70s and onward. And you have the police being the chosen group that's not only trying to keep the city alive and boost the tax base, but they're also being seen as the people that are going to put money back into the tax base by being middle class taxpayers that work for the government, and not just saying that police are the only agents of the carceral system. There's also judges, there's lawyers, there's people that work in prisons. All these people create that new middle class. And if you don't have an industry, since all these factories have left the city, our services industry, our commercial industry, and our tourist industries are the only ones that we're profiting off of majority. If it's not real estate, that means maybe crime has become an industry in a lot of big cities. So not just Philly, but New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami. And this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with crime becoming an industry to create a money-making, tax-generating system to keep a middle class, to uplift the budget.
That's a great point that you make. And just to that, not just in Philadelphia, but around the state and around the country, right? So we have, black and brown bodies from Philadelphia going to populate prisons in rural counties all over the state. And it becomes, when there are no other jobs there, it becomes, a main form of employment. So it's also a way to prop up, employment in rural counties as well outside of Philadelphia. It's a brilliant point. Thank you. Anybody have anything else they want to add?
I just want to piggyback on what the sister said, because it was so profound, and there's so many layers to it. But the one thing I want to pick out is two things: is that what she described and what Celine described. Everybody, it's a caste system, right? Everybody has to read Michelle Alexander's book, Caste. Just lays it all out about the caste system. Isabel Wilkerson, I'm sorry. Isabel Wilkerson, my apologies, the caste system. But anyway, I think the thing that stood out to me about what she was saying was about the property and about how, we are, you ever hear, because I'll tell you my personal story real quick. When I was growing up, I grew up in West Philly between Overbrook and down the bottom, right? So in between Overbrook and down the bottom, you're literally going down, right? And you see 3-story houses that look like they were once amazing houses, right? But they don't look like they used to look. And I just remember my family always saying, why do we destroy these neighborhoods? Why do we destroy these houses? We didn't. You know that? We didn't destroy anything. It was said like 2 or 3 times. It was the white flight when we started moving in some of those neighborhoods, and then you had the white flight. All of the services, all of the things, the government entities that kept those neighborhoods thriving, that kept those neighborhoods alive, they all left with the white flight, right? So we were left to our own devices and pretty much had to do everything on our own. And half of the time when we got those mortgages, they were like, predatory loans that were double and triple what everybody else, what white folks was paying for the same house, right? So it's not like we could get repairs or get loans to get repairs done. Some of those houses, my grandmom owned her house down the bottom for 50, 60 years, right? And so I'm saying that to say that blight, right, litter, all of those things that just are commonplace in the hood, that's the enemy of progress as it relates to crime, reducing crime, police presence, not just the way the police view us, but really like the way we view ourselves, right? And so I never forget the time when I was living on, Union Street, right off Lancaster Avenue, walking up and down Lancaster Avenue to going to work every day. It was depressing, man. I'm just gonna say it. It was depressing. Walking up and down Lancaster Avenue was depressing. It was, period. But I'm just saying that our environments, you know what I'm saying, the places we live, all of those things add to, not just the way the police view us, being able to come into our neighborhoods and wreak havoc and do whatever we want, but the way we view ourselves and how, some of our children just walk up and down the street and just toss their trash on the ground. But all that stuff, that mentality, that was not by chance. That was not just something that we decided to have, or it's not just a way that we decided to be. All of this was thrust upon us, decades and decades and decades of neglect. So I just want to say that, when it comes to really controlling our destiny, when it comes to not having to rely on police, our destiny really is in our own hands. And if we want to look at the Black Panther Party as a case study on that statement, we really can do that, because a lot of a lot of the things we have now, free breakfast for children, a lot of those social welfare programs, the Black Panthers were the first ones to think of it. They were the first ones to do it. And they were looking at other countries and how they treated their poor people. Right, so I'm just saying that if we realize, we understand the need to defund the police, then I think we have to collectively, individually and collectively, we have to do a lot of self-work in order to get to that point. Like they said in the documentary, we got to start talking to our neighbors, and we have to start, taking care of each other and having mechanisms in place to deal with our own problems.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to do one more question, to the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience, okay? And this is a long question, so apologies. But, and it's long, and I need to read it because it's long. All right. After the massive worldwide George Floyd protests, we saw a dramatic increase in public discourse and policies centered around ending police immunity and shifting public dollars away from policing and into other community-centered methods that reduce crime and limit violence. However, over the preceding years, we experienced significant increases in rates of violent crime in both cities and rural areas, which some politicians weaponized to shift the narrative back to law and order and expand funding for police. LA and Chicago elected mayors more aligned with movements reimagining community safety, while New York City and now Philadelphia elected mayors touting a return to solutions centered around policing. Why did LA and Chicago go one way and Philly and New York City went the other? And what can we do in Philadelphia to resist the reimplementation of stop and frisk and strengthen our movements for racial, social, and economic justice and liberation?
The way I think, I feel that what happens is it's intentional distraction. We're distracted as if we watch a game, whether that's basketball, football, or anything else, and that we can't just enjoy the game. We've got to choose a side. Republican, Democrat, Eagles, Giants. And so it's built upon emotion, and somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And that ties into the marketing that we have with regard to product and price and place and promotion. So if you're distracted, you're vulnerable, and you become part of the product that they get to use to sell. And the price, well, the price helps get determined because whether that's a pharmaceutical industry that makes money off of you, okay, Kensington, you get to choose between incarceration and or treatment, or the prisons that invest way more money, what is it, $50,000, but how much for the schools? That's the price tag that comes with more policing, more incarceration, and I said product, price, place. Well, the place is Philadelphia. Just look at Act 40. When you came in, you saw a blue sheet of paper, and our government, now remember, 5 decades of Democrats, okay? Our government decided that they would horse trade triple tax credits while they gave away prosecutory authority or prosecution power from the DA we elected. Our government decided that. Twice, okay? They decided that it was more important. So what are you going to do with the triple tax credit money? Use that for bail? The challenge that we have is that we've been distracted while their marketing and narrative continues to work. People are more concerned about how things appear and what it seems, what's right and what's not, what's wrong and what it sounds like. And it's long overdue time for us to stop caring about what it looks like. On the surface, I say we single them out. You go after the local first, and you single out, and you find the weakest link, and then you make a big deal out of this person crushing and staying on them. And then the rest of them get nervous because, and I'm talking about our legislators right now, and they get nervous because they see that we are targeting this person that allowed for this to come up out of committee. Did you get called? Did you get called? When it was time for this bill to be passed, did any of us in this room get called? But when it's an election season, we are called for money and for votes. Game over. 5 decades is long enough. You are, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're all the same. You're a government that chooses to harm us. So when we get back to what the product is, the product are people that are distracted, and you're distracted from poverty and mental health and fear. And it works. But we've got to start singling out our own from our party, single them out, go after them, drag them, and run somebody against them and let all of the rest of them find that same fear that we on a regular basis have. On a regular basis, I have to worry about somebody kicking in my door, and my son is nonverbal, and what the police are going to do to him because he can't stop moving because he's got cerebral palsy. I want somebody else to have fear like that. Somebody from our government. So the next time you want to make a decision in horse trade, our vote, you think about what's going to happen. We need to target, isolate, and go after them.
Thank you.
I agree with you. Of course. And I want to add on to what T-Bar has said. I think that we have to.
They want to know what's your name in the audience.
Oh, Manika Dirksen. Yes. So I wanted to add on to what T-Bar said. I'm from Philly, born and raised. I'm an assistant professor at Morgan State University in Baltimore. So I want to say that in addition to what T-Bar said, that we have to be invested in our communities. So when I was doing research for my dissertation on policing in Philly in the 70s, I was just like overwhelmed by the fact that I don't want the same cases of police brutality, of like neglect to happen again. Like I'm reading about, and so in the 1970s, there were 469 police-involved shootings in Philadelphia. At least 66% of those people that were shot or killed by the police were black. And at the time, from 1970 to 1978, the black population in Philadelphia was about 33%. So clearly, there's a racial disparity in how the city is policed. So to see there's being issues with policing today, in the 70s, especially when Rizzo was mayor from 1972 to 1980, the police budget made up, the city's, the spending for police made up about 19% of the city's budget. Today it's 15%. So it's a little better, but it's about $760 million that the city currently pays to the police department. And there's a lot of issues with the police department in that it claims to have a 6,500 police force, but some of those people are not actively on patrols or doing detective work or other things. There was a report released in October 2022 by the City Controller's Office with Rebecca Reinhardt that said that a lot of the strategies of maintaining records and transporting documents is not properly kept up to date or processed properly. There's issues or potential situations with fraud. There's also issues of litigation in which the police are using violence or committing offenses or committing crimes involving sexual assault or corrupting crime scenes, and millions of dollars every year goes to paying out-of-court settlements because of that. And that's money that could be going to schools or to housing. And I mean, to say defund the police can mean to reappropriate some of that money that's going to police, that's $760 million, plus paid overtime, which always goes over budget. And we don't really know what it is unless maybe a reporter tells us. And this is the same thing that happened in the 70s in Philly. And to think that we have to not only petition like city council and our like council people and other government officials by not just like going to protest, but also making phone calls, sending letters. So whether if you're like me, you send some like letters with your name on it, or you send anonymous letters. I do both. I mean, you got to do something. You got to do something to make sure that you're on their neck. Like you're actively watching. You're watching the news. You're reading the newspaper. And to go through the Black Panther route or the Young Lords route, invest in local community organizations. So I actually have been volunteering with the Joseph E. Coleman Library at Green and Shelton, around the neighborhood where I grew up. doing like activism. We do fundraising, help with books and other programming. Sometimes I'm donating money or time to other local organizations. We have a bunch of them. So I mean, even if you just have like an organization, let's say the Mural Arts Program, that also has a restorative justice program where they involve former inmates doing painting projects or art projects or other things to attribute to beautifying the neighborhood. Like, you could have an account where you just put it on auto pay, $5, $10 a month, and you're still supporting that organization even if you have to work 9 to 5 or the graveyard shift, and you can't physically donate your time, because we're going to have to do both. We have to petition and badger political officials, but we also have to do activism work, even if it's like giving up a Saturday or a Sunday or something. We have to do something to rebuild our neighborhoods, because it's going to take a lot of decades to fix all of the neglect and abandonment and exploitation that has happened in big cities like ours. It's not going to happen overnight.
Thank you. But we also have to start now, right? Yeah. All right. I want to let Matthew give his response to this question, and if you could keep it on the shorter side so we can get questions from the audience.
Sure. Yeah. It all started when so being from Los Angeles, I was surprised to see LA on the list as making progressive choices, and so the reality is, the LAPD budget has increased, the Sheriff's Department budget has increased, pay raises were given to both. We had elected abolitionists to city council back in 2022, and yet the budgets and pay raises still happened. Our mayor, Karen Bass, who was elected as a Democrat, was running against Rick Caruso, who had been a lifelong Republican, land developer, like he builds shopping malls and all of that, and ran on the tough on crime, thing. And so Gina Viola, who's in the film, who ran for mayor, told me a story how she was on the debate stage with Karen Bass, and Karen says to her, "You're saying things that I can't say." And so, it speaks to actually what T-Bot, what you were saying earlier, which was really brilliant, about the masters of manipulative messaging, and how, we get people in office and then for whatever reason, whether their hands are tied or the outside interests come in and they want to keep their jobs or whatever. Even George Gascon, who we elected as a progressive prosecutor, before he took office, people were trying to recall him. So I just wanted to share that context, because we're, even like City of West Hollywood reduced the number of deputies and created a public safety ambassador program where they had 15 or 20 public safety ambassadors. And then after the smash and grabs and all of that stuff, they hired more deputies back. And so that's something we're dealing with in LA County.
Thank you for that context. I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, we have Ashana and Nigel who will help get microphones to folks. Oh, and Wendell. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. Okay.
My name is Joby McFadden, and my question was to piggyback on what the two sisters were saying, that when we grow up, like I'll be 69, and I remember when I was 19, how my neighborhood looked, and how we say, like, I'm not saying that we should go against the Puerto Ricans, the Koreans, or whatever, but if they ran from their country to come here to do better, and they're doing better, and we've been here over 400 years, and we haven't progressed at all. And we picking leaders that's not doing nothing. We're not even calling them account no more. And when our leaders that were leaders, when they died, they system, they everything died with them. But when we grow up now, everywhere we go, we don't see our people owning nothing, doing nothing, but selling drugs And that's what most of us, or we could shoot a basketball, or we could sing, or we could dance. But all of us not made to sing and dance and be bad. Some of us is made to want to be dentists, plumbers, machinists, and all this, but we don't get them opportunities because of the way that we're seeing. You understand what I'm saying? And we need to get with them leaders that we picking. We need to get them out of there. Not vote them in, we need to vote them out.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Salim?
Yeah, I want to like elaborate on that some, because a lot of everything what you said is right. One thing that I will say is that I remember when I was in prison, and I did 27 years in prison. I was walking the yard, and I was with one of, a lot of us by the time I was in my 15, 16 years, we was conscious. I was fortunate to be raised by Russell Maroon Schultz, former member of the Black Liberation Army, Fred Muhammad Burton, another member of the Black Liberation Army. All of them went in for fighting Rizzo in the late 60s and 70s. And so by the time I met them, they had like 30 years in prison. Fred Muhammad Burton's still in prison. He's been in prison 54 years. But I remember walking the yard, and one of the younger brothers said, "Man, I can't stand these ends in the yard." He was like, "I can't stand these ends in this yard. I can't stand my people." And I was like, "What's up? What you say that for?" He said, "Man, we ain't shit. That's all we do is rob. All we do is harm each other." And I used to have that perspective. But the fact of the matter is, most black people are not criminals. Most black people are working class people in this country. Most black people, if you look at us across the board, black fathers, black mothers, single mothers working their ass off to raise children, fathers present in the family, we gotta really be mindful that there's definitely reasons to have a lot of anger. There's definitely reasons to have a lot of rage, but to make sure that we direct that rage at the system that has really created these stereotypes of us. Because, look, I went to prison for murder. I came up at 18th and Wallace. The old heads in my neighborhood, from 20th and Green, used to rumble. The Moroccos. My generation came. By that time, we was just killing each other for drugs. The crack epidemic came through, but even when I reflect back on then, everyone in our communities weren't part of that shit. It was just a small number of us that was just really taking it to a different level of killing fields out there. Most of the dudes that went to school with me, man, or was on the corner with me, they went on to successful lives, have families. Now don't get me wrong, they ain't get married and those are just larger issues in our community, right? But they didn't come to prison. They didn't murder no one. They didn't get locked up for robbing someone. I really, we really need to have conversations and talk to our people, like our children, and having more positive images of ourselves, man. Because trust me, we need to hold ourselves accountable as a people. We definitely need to do that. And we need to hold, and like I said, I came up under Russell Maroon Schultz, the members of the Black Liberation Army, who held the police accountable by the barrel of a gun because they were slaughtering our people in the community. That's what they said. They said if there was going to be funerals, we made the decision it was going to be funerals on both sides. They made that decision, and they were men enough that they said, you know what, we accept the consequences. I'm going to die in prison. I'm going to get killed. But they made that decision. We need to make this, we need to hold, whether it's the police, politicians, whoever, accountable, regardless if they look like us or not. Like those days of me voting for someone because they black is over. I told, and also, the only thing that mattered to me is your politics. When I was, and I'm gonna just pass it at this, when I was 19 years old at the Hole at Graterford, they were starving a prisoner who came down from Dallas because he beat a guard up at Dallas. They weren't feeding him. It was like the third day. A white guard, a woman, walked by his door. He said, listen, I haven't eaten in 3 days. I need some food. They weren't letting us. She laughed at him, said, fuck you, I don't care. So he spit on her. I don't care. Like they were starving that man. He had the right to have that rage. I watched a platoon of guards. I watched the black homie guard from North Philly come down there. I watched the white guard we call Cowboy from somewhere up northeastern Pennsylvania come down there. I watched a queer guard, and this was 1992, so, everyone bothered the queer guard, whether it was prisoners or guards. That guard didn't catch any peace from anyone. I watched them drag that man out the cell, beat him, and then hold his legs spread eagle so that white woman could stomp on his nuts. After that experience, I said, I'm going to evaluate people by their actions. And when I became older and started to become political, I said I'm going to evaluate them by their politics. So for me, whether it goes back to Wilson Good or Sherrell Parker, who's the mayor now, that shit, I'm your brother or your sister, it don't work with me. It just don't. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to evaluate your words and your actions and how your policies are going to impact my community. And if you advocating policies that are going to get me killed, you best believe I'm going to fight like a dog against you regardless to what color your skin is.
Thank you. It's another question. Thank you. All right, I know you got to go.
Okay.
Could we let him ask his first because he's got to run? Thanks, Ernie.
Thanks, Seth. You hear me? All right. I'm going to ask a question at the top, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit to get deeper into the question. Okay. So the baseline question I have is, given who's hosting this whole event, is what's labor got to do with it, and what's production got to do with it? So to elaborate a little bit further, people talk about things like white supremacy or anti-blackness and stuff like that. They kind of frame it as though it's just a widely held bad opinion. Like they just hate black people because we're black, right? That's just not consistent with history, right? We heard in the film they talked about how the police started with slave patrols, right? So what was that really about? That was about them recapturing property, right? Because black people were property, right? So this is really all about capital in the end, right? So what I'm wondering is like, black people are not hated because we're black. We were hated as of the moment our labor was no longer free, right? How do we, that's huge profits. You got people who are working for free. It's all profit, right? So all of a sudden that goes away. What are we going to do? Well, we got to control that shit, right? We got to keep them working, right? If we could somehow extract labor from their bodies and destroy the body, they would do that too. So what I'm wondering is like, what is like, so, and there's also a parallel between like labor movements, like trying to appeal to the bosses, like, hey, we want better working conditions, but we're still trying to appeal to the bosses. And then us, what y'all talking about now, politicians, like, hey, we're trying to appeal to the state to say like, hey, we need better politicians, we need better policy. But I'm wondering like, what's the abolitionist vision of labor look like? What does work you got to do with it? Like, how do we change those conditions so that, it's not just about, appealing to these power brokers, but like, how do we control that for ourselves? You know what I mean? I hope that's clear.
Thank you. Anybody want to take us?
I think I understand that question, and I'm going to try and answer it as someone that used to work in labor. I used to be the legislative director for SCIU State Council, and in that capacity, and Jared is here, he's the current legislative director. The thing I want to highlight too is that in 2020, after the George Floyd murder, in my capacity as legislative director, one of the things that I was tasked to do was bring SCIU into the legislative fight to address some of the systemic reasons why the George Floyd thing happened in the first place, right? And so you may or may not know this. Unions, organized labor gives a lot of money to politicians. Incumbents. People that are in elected office, people that we lobby, for or and against in some cases. Organized labor, I don't want to get into specifics, but it's a lot of money being, dished out from organized labor. And so because that's the case, depending on what union you're from, you're going to have some political capital. You're going to be able to go into a lot of legislative offices and say, I need you to do this. You ain't got to have no constituents behind you either. You see what I'm saying? Just on the strength of who you are, your place in that union, you'll get that thing done in a lot of cases, right? So after the George Floyd thing, when we started seeing the uprisings in Philly, and love them or hate them, right? I will tell you straight up and down that a big reason why we got what I'm about to tell you we got was because of those uprisings. We had legislators, particularly Legislative Black Caucus, storm the State House and literally shut session down for the day after the George Floyd thing. What they did was they went into caucus and they demanded that something on a legislative issue, be taken up. And SEIU was at the center of that because they give so much money to elected officials. They can be in those rooms. SEIU wasn't the only labor union, but they're one of the ones that give some of the most money, right? And because they are considered the radicals within the labor movement, they're going to take those hard stands, right? Because some of their locals have up to 80% people of color, black people, in their locals. They're going to say we can take stands against anti-gun violence because our workers, our members, go to work every day on SEPTA. Some of them were at Broad and Island a couple years ago when we had that mass shooting. And that was one of the reasons why we said we need to take a stand on anti-gun violence, right? Because our members are being affected by this stuff, right? And so just to sum it up, because I can be long-winded, I'm trying to hurry up and sum it up. But to try and answer your question directly, we got an anti-chokehold bill passed in 2020, which this stuff in Harrisburg never happens. We got an anti-chokehold bill. We banned the chokehold. It's low-hanging fruit, but it's something, right? And I'm not saying that we should be celebrating that. We should be like doing the Sambo dance on top of the table. But I'm saying that some of these legislative solutions do exist. And as lay members, we gotta keep our ear to the streets so that we can be pushing those things forward as well. And the same holds true for bills that aren't good, because I saw organizations like the Reform Alliance last year going from community to community trying to promote a bad parole probation bill that ended up getting passed, right? And that had institutional support, And so when it comes to organized labor, they have political power and they have power amongst the people, and they're one of the very few types of organizations that can operate in murky ways when it comes to being able to donate to candidates and also being able to lobby candidates. It's amazing. I miss it, but to be able to move in all of those different spaces, you have influence, right? And so the last thing I'll say is that we got the anti-chokehold bill and we got the police database bill, right? And so that passed. So now when the officer is fired for misconduct, he can't just go to the next county over and get a job without that record following him to that other county. Because that was happening a lot. And so organized labor had a lot to do with that. And again, that's low-hanging fruit. Imagine when we get to the point where we can say, and organized labor is in the position to be able to take up, say, for example, Act 77, right? Which is one of the mechanisms in place that keeps road cops from being held accountable. You see what I'm saying? So we need I don't know if it's arbitration reform. I don't know if it's reforms to the police union contracts that make it so when they hurt somebody, it's hard for them to be held accountable internally, right? So, but those are the kinds of things that we got to pay attention to. Those are the kind of things that labor has influence and power over. And when you have good unions in place that care about the people and also give money to politicians to be able to have a say in their legislative endeavors and agendas, we got to lobby them too. We got to lobby the unions.
All right. I want to, okay.
One comment.
Can I ask this, though? And just because I want to get to we're coming up on 7, and I know I see some more hands out there. So, and I want folks to be able to ask questions. So can we keep our responses to 1 minute or less so we can get to some more folks?
I agree with everything that Lee said, and I do think that the power of the union is extremely important. That's why Working Families Party needs to have more unions at the table. And while they're at the table, the number one thing that they need to push is that these legislators move themselves to term limits. And without term limits, we're going to continue to see the old guard stay in place. So that's what we need to push with regard to our unions and our voters. We need term limits for all of these positions. That's it.
All right, thank you. I see Ernie over here.
And I got one back here. Back to you.
Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm just all over the place. I don't even know where to start. It's something. I'm gonna start with a movie I just watched. It's called Night Catches Us. I just watched it the other night, and it's amazing. And there's a movie that was actually made here in Philadelphia, not too far from where I live in Logan. And it starred Kerry Washington, and it was about the movement back in 1976. With the Rizzo stage, and I can remember because I'm not originally from Philadelphia. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, Bed-Stuy girl, and my trauma back then, I'm a 60s kid, and the trauma back then in the early 70s were blackouts, and we used to have blackouts to where when the lights went out, things happened, and we didn't know if our doors was going to be kicked down at the time. And we didn't know if the cops was just going to just come to your house because they felt as though you stole something, or a family member is hiding in your house to have a little television, you know. So when my mom arrived in Philadelphia, it was almost around that time, that 76, 70, you know, and I'm like, what's going on? So I'm starting to hear as a younger person, you know, the gang wars. I'm thinking like, I moved from, you know, New York to Philadelphia, it's going to be okay. It was not okay. So I moved right in the heart of North Philadelphia where there was gang wars going on around, you know, Walton Elementary School around 25th and Lehigh. So I'm like, what in the world is going on? So to make a longer story short, we dealing with trauma from our youth to our adulthood, and now I'm dealing with the trauma because I'm raising 4 children, and out of the 4 children, I have 3 black sons who have done absolutely everything correct here in the city of Philadelphia. I've raised my children. I'm 20 years union as well, 1199, and also union delegate, so I'm a fighter. So I raised my children along with my daughter as grassroots kids. So during the George Floyd incident and the uprooting, one of my twins, true story, one of my twins was driving downtown. The day was it June the 2nd, I believe it was, to turn in his voter registration at City Hall. I get the call, Mom, it's a police car on fire. I'm going, it's a police car on fire? The first thing I'm saying to myself, you're down there to drop off a voter registration card, and me as a mom, knowing how it can go left, I'm screaming on the phone with him to get out of there as quickly as you can, because now I'm saying this is a black boy in the midst of chaos, and he could be arrested or killed. You see what I'm saying? He could be arrested or killed in the midst of dropping off a voter registration form. And this is the unrest that I have to deal with. Now I have 3 grandsons. The cycle continues of me being on the phone, constantly trying to find out where my grandson is. He goes to Constitution High School. Where is he? What's going on? He's going to 3 after-school programs in the city. He's doing the right thing. Okay? So to look at this film, it calls a trigger. To look at this film, to hear what all you are saying, and I'm a mom that has done all of that. And my neighbors do have my telephone number. I remember I was in Washington, D.C., and something was going on in my home. I couldn't leave Washington at the time. I had to call a neighbor to go around to my house. So all of that, what y'all saying, we're doing a lot of it. So the unrest, the triggers that we are dealing with, what can we do right now? Because we get what we have done, but starting tonight, what can we do to continue to not have the ones that's really doing it to still be uneasy? Because we know it's still a fight out here, and we need constructive response.
1 minute.
Everybody, Monica?
I'll just try and answer that very quickly. I mean, you have to engage and join organizations in your community, in your neighborhood that are dealing with that trauma. And if they don't exist, then you have to start them. I tell people a lot of times you should start with your neighbors. One of the things coming home from prison that really amazes me so much is that the neighborhoods have changed so much. When I went in 1990, you at least knew mostly who your neighbors was. There was some type of social cohesion. You spoke to your neighbors. And now there's some pockets of the city that is still like that, but gentrification has changed things so much that people in the neighborhoods don't even say good morning to each other, talk to each other. So this is a longer conversation that we have to have as a community and activists, how to engage our neighbors, especially when things are so transitory because people can't afford rent. So someone could be in one apartment for a year, move into another part of the city, bouncing around. So the response, the short answer is find a community that's dealing with that trauma. If there isn't one, start one. If you can't start one, then just start on your block with your neighbors because that's how we have to do it.
Got one more question, Seth.
All right, this will be the last question, I think, unless, it's 7 o'clock, and I know I want to thank, the Falzer Club for hosting us, but I know folks have lives and families to get home to, and so I don't want to keep them. So let's make this the last question.
All right. Can I proceed? Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Waldman. I'm a member of AFCDC 47 and also Philly Democratic Socialists of America. I really appreciated this film and this panel and really love everything that everyone has said. The one thing I heard that I really appreciate that I kind of want to bring back to is policing being intertwined with capitalism and how police are function to protect property and also turn people into property. And I'll give two examples of that. One is, two examples for the first one is, there is a quote unquote like social good real estate company developer called Shift Capital that owns a lot of property in Kensington, including a property that is currently leased by Savage Sisters, which are not being, their lease isn't being renewed. This is I'm sorry? Oh, okay. I thought you were correcting me. But and Savage Sisters does, they do on the ground work to treat people with, who have substance abuse disorder and are addicted to, and kind of get through, those trauma responses. Another example, and now Shift Capital came into we're providing this social good, but then when the market is turning enough, it's like, oh, we can actually now rent this out to a higher paid tenant. This area is gentrified. It's reached its tipping point where we don't need to be have a social good in this area because we can make more money. The other thing is, if you've seen the Palestine protests, police are outside of Zara. They're protecting property, and then they're going and they're silencing free speech. Another example, when they're turning people into property, is when people go to prison. Philadelphia has a contract with Philacor, which is a corporation that profits off of prison labor that people, quote unquote, voluntary, but they, make cents per hour to do things and make products that are pretty much no bid contracts to the city. We recently learned that we wanted to just purchase tablecloths for our department. We can't buy it anywhere except for Philacor. So I guess what my question is, based on that, is how far can we go in achieving substantial police reform without also dismantling capitalism?
Well, that should be a short answer. Who wants to tackle that one? You got 1 minute.
No, I mean, you answered your own question. You're going to have to dismantle capitalism. I mean, I tell people when we talk about abolition, I'm not an abolitionist to dismantle police and prisons. If you're talking about abolition, you have to be talking about abolishing the social contract of the United States and then starting something anew. That's our position on abolition. So, yes, you have to abolish capitalism and racial capitalism, certainly.
Thank you. That was short. Good job. Can what? I think that's a great way to end this, Zelma. Yeah. Does, no mic? You don't need a mic. Go ahead, Zelma.
My name is Zelma. I'm a member at SEIU, Healthcare PA. Mr. Matthew, thank you for letting me get in touch with my feelings and my emotions that I block out all the time. Thank you for letting me water up and not have to say that I'm strong all the time because I keep my whole house together. I thank you for introducing me to something that I was not aware of that I want to share with my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. And I thank the panels for opening up and being so direct to a person like me who hides every emotion that you can name because I have to be strong to let me know that my purpose in life is to help others. I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Zelma. I think that was a fantastic way to end tonight. I mean, I want to thank Ashana and the folks at the Falzer Club for hosting us and making the space available. Thank you so much. It's an incredible space, and I really love your mission to use it as a community space for social justice, for these kinds of conversations. Thank you so much. I want to thank Matthew Solomon for making this film. Absolutely. At such a critical time when we need to be having these conversations together with our family members, with our community, for giving us this reason to come together to talk about the issues that we're facing and how we want to move forward together. I want to thank the incredible panel here, Lee, Salim, Monica, Tiba. I want to thank Labor for Black Lives for continuing to push this discussion within the labor movement and get the labor movement more involved in the fight for racial and social and economic justice in the city of Philadelphia. And I want to thank all of the participating unions who are part of Labor for Black Lives, who brought members out today, who came. Thank you all so much. Thank you to those of you who aren't in a union but came out tonight to be part of this conversation and to see this film. And thank you for signing in because we look forward to continuing this conversation. We want to, find other opportunities to host this film, to have this discussion. In and around Philadelphia. So thank you so much. We appreciate you coming out, and may everybody have a safe and blessed rest of your evening. And we'll see you in the streets.